Hi, this is Jorly Pena, and welcome to Unhurried. This is episode 14, and today's topic is mediumship. Essentially, I'm going to be sharing my stories, my experience with mediumship, otherwise known as talking to dead people. And I will also mention it's not, there's some people I know who I would call natural mediums who, since they were children, can see dead people very reliably and regularly, talk with dead people. That has not been me, but I have some stories, and I've been really looking forward to recording this. So these are from some of my favorite stories. So going back to 2014, I just had to write down, no, 2013. I'm not good with time. When I was pregnant with my second son, Lincoln, I lived in Queens in Astoria at the time, and a friend of mine, Nikki, she had told me about the spiritualist church. She originally heard about them before from Lilydale. So anyway, you might want to look up spiritualism. It started in Lilydale, New York. Anywho, here I was in Queens, and I had a bunch of friends from yoga and the Wild Woman Project. And one of them, Nikki, said, "Hey, let's go to this event. The spiritualist church in New York has this, I don't know if they still do. I'm going to look it up this year. But they would do these readings, kind of like a fair where you could have these like mini readings around Halloween." So anyway, I was like, it was October. My son was born I was like 8 months pregnant. And I was like, why not? Sure, let's go. And I think it was Meredith, Nikki, and we go to this, I don't know, it's kind of like an office building in Soho. Not important. The important thing is I had no idea. I did not know that getting a reading with a medium meant you were asking them to talk to dead people, because they also had reading. I loved, I didn't know the difference between a psychic and a medium or a healer. This is all new territory for me. So some of you might be mediums listening to this topic. So this is old hat. Some of you might be where I was that really didn't have a clue, but I did not have a clue. And, I went in with this very open mind and signed up with somebody. They had like everybody's picture on the wall, and you could do these like 15-minute readings. So it was a bunch of different healers and mediums all in a room. So I signed up with this woman who was a medium, and I didn't know what that entailed until I sat down, and she said, so is there somebody in particular, anyone in particular that you would like to connect with? And that's when I was like, oh yes, right. Dead people. At that point, I didn't have that much experience with loved ones passing over. Luckily, but except for both of my grandmothers, one of whom, my grandma Alice, my dad's mom, had passed away not too long before then. So I said, oh yeah, one of my grandmas, that would be nice. So then, kind of without missing a beat, this, and I think I said something like, well, I don't know what a lot of dead people, one of my grandmas. And so this woman said, sat for a minute. And then she said, well, you had a high school friend. This, I don't remember the words she used, but essentially she's like, a high school friend of yours is coming through. And indeed, a junior high and high school friend named Summer had died from cancer really young. And the part that just floored me at the time, she starts describing Summer. She starts talking about Summer was always really tall. And you know how in junior high, a lot of girls get taller than the boys. And so Summer was kind of shy. And this woman just started describing her. She was like she was really tall, but she would kind of like hunch her shoulders down. She kind of, she didn't want to be noticed, but she was so tall. And I mean, you can imagine out of the blue with like no input from me whatsoever, she starts describing a friend of mine. And so it just got my attention, right? It's like, holy crap, this person, how would she know that? And it was a really beautiful message. She just gave me some messages from summer, and it was really lovely to connect. And then she said, "Oh, basically, I have your grandparents here, the couple." And at this point, my mom's dad was still alive, and my dad's dad died years before I was born. My dad's dad passed away suddenly when my dad was in high school, so I had never met him. But like I said, my dad's mom had recently died at this point when I was getting this reading. And so it was just really cool because she was saying, she starts, kind of describing them. And again, I was visibly pregnant. I was 8 months pregnant. So it was pretty obvious that I was pregnant. It doesn't take a medium to tell you that, but she didn't even ask, is it a girl or a boy? I was pregnant with a boy, and she said, "Have you ever given any thought to naming this child after, or naming him after your grandfather?" And, I kind of started laughing because my dad's name is Dewey and my grandfather's name was Dewey. My dad was named after my grandfather, and I already had a son at this point also. And my brother had a son already. And when I was pregnant, when my sister-in-law was pregnant, my dad would always make all these jokes about how we should name, continue that tradition and name them Dewey. And we had a name already picked out. We had a first name and a middle name picked out for our son. So I was like, oh, that's weird that you mentioned that, because, yeah, my dad, my dad would love that. And, he's always pushing for that. And I said, and it's like, at this point, I'm like picturing my grandparents behind me. I can't see them, but I also I don't really know this grandfather, but I don't want to offend him and say it's kind of an old fashioned name. But I was just like, I don't know. And then she said, he goes like, not even a middle name. And she said that my grandma kind of smacked him and said, "Oh, you just let her, name him whatever she wants." And that was when she said, it was so my grandmother Alice, to say something like that. And I don't know, it was just cool. And it was really sweet. She passed along some other messages. And, I went downstairs after this. My husband came to pick me up, and because he and my other son were in the city while I was doing this reading. And I was like, "Hey, I think we need to put another name in there." So this first story is about how my middle son got his second middle name. We ended up adding Dewey to that. And it was just a really special thing. But my dad is, let's just say, a non-believer, and an ardent, active non-believer in any of this mystical shit, otherworldly, not explainable through physics and engineering phenomena. And I didn't feel the need to tell him about it. I actually really didn't want to tell him about it. And what happened was, my son was born, my dad and my stepmom came to visit. And one night, and my dad was really touched, I think, by including that name, but I didn't tell him. I went to a medium, and grandpa came through and suggested this. I just didn't say that at all. I wanted it to kind of be my, I don't know, I didn't want him to spoil a moment with his disbelief, and it didn't really matter. Anywho, but when they came to visit, I normally go to bed really early, but when you have a baby, you have to get up and nurse them. And so one night during the visit, my stepmom and myself and Lincoln, my son, were up, and I was sitting with her talking, and I kept getting this nudge, like somebody was putting an idea in my head, tell her the story that I just told you, tell her the story about Grandpa Dewey and Grandma Alice. And have you ever had a conversation with somebody and you're getting intuitive hits and you're arguing with the inner voice saying no, not going to do it. No, no, thank you. I'm not bringing this up. I I don't want to, I don't need to defend this. I don't need her to tell me it's not real. But eventually I told her the story, and her reaction was absolutely unexpected to me. Cause again, like my dad, like she's, into computer science. And I did not think that it would resonate, and it really did. And she was really touched. And somehow I mentioned Lilydale. I guess because I was talking about this, this church I went to for the reading is or is like related to Lilydale. And again, like they live in California. So I don't think that she said, I've always wanted to go to, I've wanted to go to Lilydale for a long time. And I thought, how do you know about that? And we ended up that night deciding, okay, in 6 months, like this summer, let's go to Lilydale. Let's take a trip together. And like very odd. My stepmom and I had never planned a trip together. My husband was like going to be working, like he couldn't even go. And it just, it seemed kind of crazy, but we made that plan. We said, let's go. And so I picked kind of a random, not a random date, but there is a medium who's still very active today. She actually teaches a lot of courses. Her name's Lisa Williams, who had a podcast. Love podcast that I love. And she had just moved to Lilydale and was going to be doing a big show in whatever, it might be August. So fast forward to summer. My dad ended up going on the trip too. So I have like my older son, this 6-month-old, my stepmom and my dad, made this fun road trip we went to Niagara Falls too. And actually my husband could join for part of the time, but yada, yada, yada. We end up at this larger event. So there's other stories. Lilydale is a really magical, beautiful place. But for the purposes of this story, my stepmom and I were the only ones to buy tickets to see this show. So the way a lot of so if you see a medium one-on-one, as I just described, and I'm sure they all work a little bit differently, but they're giving you information, you're one-on-one, so you can validate it as you go or not. When you're in a big audience, and the way Lisa Williams does this, is, the way I've heard her describe it too, is like, she's on stage, you've got the audience, and she almost, I don't know if it's on the left or the right side of her, but she has like, basically like the dead people that want to come through and communicate to their loved ones, are kind of like in line here. And then when one of them is like, it's their turn, they'll describe a lot of times how they passed away, just specific details. And so she'll, in front of the audience, relay the details. And if that resonates for you, if you think someone, and this is like a couple hundred people in the audience, you raise your hand. And maybe there's 5 people raising their hand, and then she'll ask them for more specifics until there's like one person, and then the message is for them. So it's kind of cool. Highly recommend going to one of these if you've never been, with a reputable medium. But so we're in the audience. She did a couple of readings, and then she said, okay, so I have a grandmother. Her name's Alice. Grandma, who has a grandma Alice? So I raised my hand. And I think I was the only one that raised my hand. And again, I'm not going to relay the whole thing, but the part that ended up being pretty incredible was, a lot of time, as I understand it, and I've studied this a bit more since, it's easier for them to give images or, things like that. They don't necessarily like always speak in like full sentences or words, but they can also do gestures. So at one point, she's saying all these things about my grandmother, and it was really beautiful. And again, she's up on stage, so it's hard to see, and if you're on the podcast, you can't hear, but on the video, like she basically took like her 2 fingers and took one finger and made this motion with her 2 index fingers. And it kind of looks familiar because she's like, your grandmother's doing this. And so she's making this motion with her fingers. And I'm like, it vaguely looks familiar, but not really. And then my stepmom next to me is like, kind of like hitting my arm going, like she wanted to say something. So she stood up and said, Lisa asked who she was. She says, oh, I was Alice's daughter-in-law and my stepmom, along with my, she's like, I was one of her caretakers also towards the ends of her life. She spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And she said, I think it was that a neighbor's garage door had like fallen, or some garage door my grandmother had gotten like stuck in a door, and her nail grew back in like a strange way. And it was kind of like a groove there. And that was like a nervous tick or something that my grandmother would do. And mind blowing. Like I love that experience, just going, for me, I mean, you weren't there. You don't know my grandmother. You didn't see this finger gesture. But for me, and probably for my stepmom, it was, well, there's confirmation that when we die, we don't die. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And then there were a lot of other beautiful messages that came through from my stepmom's dad. And so that experience is really precious to me, and very much made me a believer, if I wasn't already, but just confirmation for me. And so the last story I'll say about this is acting as a medium. So now I've had these experiences with people telling me things that they couldn't possibly have known, real validation. And I love reading memoirs from mediums. So Rebecca Rosen, I love hers. So many. One of my favorite authors is James Van Praagh. Well, Lisa Williams is another one. I should write all these down. I'll put them in the show notes on unhurriedpod.com. And so I just loved reading them. There's a whole nother reason why I can get into why I love them so much, but I read a lot, and I'd read a lot of medium memoirs, but I always thought of it as like, oh, they have that gift. I don't have that gift. That is, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and see dead people. It's not my thing. It's pretty cool, but it's not my thing. Anywho, so James Van Praagh, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He was doing a intuition workshop at Omega in Rhinebeck, New York. So this is 2018. I signed up for this because that I can get on board with owning, like my gifts with intuition. And I was like, this will be fun. I really love him. I love his books. If it was a medium workshop, I probably would have never signed up, but it was an intuition workshop. But this was the thing. There's some overlap between, developing these gifts and using these gifts. And so the third day, I believe it was Wednesday of this intuition workshop with James, we would do a lot of exercises to practice our intuition. So you would just various ways that you can read people in different ways. And I didn't know anybody. There's maybe, I'm not good at numbers, but like 50, 60 people at this, at this week-long course. And we would pair it with different people every time. So on Wednesday, he was talking a little bit about mediumship and said, hey, like, do you want to do some mediumship exercises? So what the exercise was, is we had a partner. So I was partnered with this woman, never met, a little bit older than me, but not much. And we were supposed to take turns, and we would think of somebody we knew who had passed on, and we would give the other person their first name, what they were in relation to us, and like one character attribute. So I forget exactly the details. I think I actually gave her the information on my other grandma, my grandma Ruth, and some things came through from her to me. And then when it was my turn to practice reading on her, she told me a name. She said she was my daughter, and I forget what the third adjective was. It was something like spunky or exuberance. And, luckily we'd had a lot of practice, because I think if I would have, like, that's the kind of thing you can get very psyched out about, to be like, I can't imagine losing a daughter. What happened though was we've had some practice. You kind of go with whatever's coming through. So I start saying whatever is coming into my mind. I'm talking about a brother. I see like a guitar. I talk about how like Like I see her playing songs and writing poetry. I said some things about her dad, not knowing where this is coming from. It feels, I think I've said this in previous podcasts, where when you're new to these, it feels very much like you're making it up, right? Except for it's specific because, in my, when I got the sense of her, like being a teenager, I got a sense of her being sick. So it was pretty clear she passed away from an illness. And you just kind of, my left brain might say, well, I don't know, what would a teenage girl like to do? Play guitar, but it's not like all teenage girls play guitar. So anyway, it's like you just relay it as it comes through. And by the end of this 5 minutes that I'm just telling her whatever comes to me, she's in tears and she's saying, are you a medium? Like, like it was all very accurate. And honestly, I was stunned and it really, wow, it was this, it was beautiful and healing and mind blowing. And, yeah, really, really cool because it was, I have these, kind of tent poles in my life. If I look back on again, the series of podcast episodes is about how I came to my current belief system, which is very different than my origins. And I think a lot of mainstream accepted beliefs. And so, I look back and that reading with that kind of Halloween reading where my friend Summer and my grandfather and my grandmother came through, and then my grandmother coming through and my stepmom's dad, like those were, wow, okay, this is real. And then it was this whole other level to be giving this woman information about her daughter. Like, I know I'm not making that up because it's coming through me and I was there. So, that is my experience with me. I mean, that's not my full experience with mediumship, but those are the highlights. And I would love to hear your stories. Like every Unhurried podcast episode, I want to hear more about you and your experiences. And I actually think my next episode is going to be a guest conversation with my friend Colleen, the small medium. She is a medium. She is what I would very much consider a natural medium. And maybe we'll hit on some mediumship too. I might have some questions for her about that. If you have any questions, let me know. I think really the focus is going to be on validation. So this, whether you're a medium or not, Colleen is really good at explaining, and she gets a lot of and asking for signs of validation. So anyway, if you don't know what that means, stay tuned for next time and I will explain it more. And God, I was so nervous I had resistance to recording this episode because it's been a while, but it feels good. It feels really good. And yeah, I hope you're well. And I hope you have an unhurried and magical week. Bye.